Havoc 1, this is Trident lead. We are pinned. I say again, pinned. Enemy fire from elevated positions, east and west ridge. We are taking casualties. Where is our air support? The voice on the radio was a ghost from a world away, a frantic prayer, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the sky. Down there, in a nameless valley of rock and death, a team of Navy SEALs was being systematically dismantled. Up here, inside the reinforced titanium bathtub of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, Captain Kate Rostova was a god with clipped wings, forced to listen to the slaughter. The call sign on her helmet read Valkyrie, a name that felt like a bitter joke. Valkyries chose the slain. She was supposed to deliver thunder, but all she could do was bear witness to the silence that followed each desperate cry for help. Her aircraft, tail number 261, sat fully armed on the hot pad at Bagram Airfield, simmering under the Afghan sun. The Warthog wasn't pretty. It was a beast of a machine, built around the most terrifying rotary cannon ever bolted to an airframe, the GAU-8 Avenger. It was a plane designed for one purpose: to get low, get slow, and obliterate anyone threatening the troops on the ground. It was the infantryman's best friend, a mechanical angel of death. And right now, it was useless. Kate's hands, covered in fire-resistant Nomex gloves, rested on the stick and throttle, a coiled stillness that betrayed the storm brewing inside her. Why were they grounded? The question burned hotter than the jet exhaust. The official word was a deconflicted airspace issue, a bureaucratic tangle while men were bleeding out. But Kate knew the real reason was sitting in the pilot's lounge, laughing over a cup of coffee, Major Dan Razor Kellen. He flew the sleek, powerful F-16 Fighting Falcon. To pilots like Razor, the A-10 was a relic, a flying tractor. At the morning briefing, he'd made sure everyone knew it. He stood before the mission map, all polished bravado and a condescending smirk. The target was a high-value individual, surrounded by a small contingent of guards in a fortified compound. A textbook SEAL operation, fast in, fast out air support. Will be handled by Viper Flight, Razor had announced, his eyes flicking dismissively towards Kate and the other A-10 pilots. We'll be on station, high and fast. Clean, surgical strikes if needed. We don't want to plow the whole valley with those antiquated cannons. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. She was the only female A-10 pilot in the wing, a fact that seemed to irritate him on a molecular level. The chief petty officer leading the SEAL team, a man named Thorne with a face like carved granite and eyes that missed nothing, had listened without expression. He'd simply asked, "What's your response time if things go sideways?" Razor had laughed. "Chief, with 2 Sidewinders and a belly full of JDAMs, things don't go sideways. They go boom. We'll have it handled before your boys even get their boots dusty." Thorne's gaze had shifted then, just for a second, to Kate. It wasn't a look of judgment, but one of cold, hard assessment. He was weighing his options, cataloguing the assets in the room. In his world, there was no room for ego, only for effectiveness. He saw a pilot and a plane. But Razor's swagger had won the day. The command, eager for the glossy precision of fighter jets, had sided with him. The Warthogs were assigned secondary alert, a glorified backup plan that everyone knew would never be activated. Now, listening to the comms, Kate felt the acid of "I told you so" burn in her throat, but it was quickly washed away by a wave of cold dread. The intel had been wrong. It wasn't a small contingent. The valley was a hornet's nest, an ambush perfectly laid and patiently waiting. Razor's Vipers had made a single pass, dropping a GPS-guided bomb on the wrong building based on faulty intelligence. Their high-speed, high-altitude attack had been useless against an enemy that was dug in, dispersed, and waiting for the ground. Team. After that one pass, they were running low on fuel and had been diverted to support another, higher priority engagement. Just like that, they were gone. The SEALs were alone. Trident lead. Be advised, asset is RTB. The Operations Center droned with chilling neutrality. No other air support currently available. A voice, ragged and young, came over the radio. From the ground. They're leaving? They're just leaving us. Then Thorne's voice, hard as iron, cut through the panic. Stay frosty. Control your fire. We get ourselves out of this. Kate looked at her crew chief, Sergeant Frank Pops Miller, who stood on the tarmac just outside her cockpit, his headset plugged into the plane's comms. He was a lifer, a man who had been working on A-10 since they were first introduced. He had seen it all, and his face, etched with the lines of 100 deployments, was a mask of grim fury. He'd been the one to nickname her Valkyrie, not as a joke, but as a prophecy. That plane, he'd told her once, tapping the warthog's ugly nose. She's a chariot. And you, Captain, you're the one who'll ride her into the Hall of Heroes. Now his words felt hollow. Her chariot was chained down. This is garbage. Pops, she muttered into her helmet MIC, her voice a low growl. Tell me something I don't know, kid, he replied, his voice a gravelly comfort in her ear. Command is sticking to their book. Razor screwed the pooch, and now they're trying to cover their six instead of saving those boys. The book. The rules of engagement, the carefully constructed chain of command, the endless regulations that looked so neat and tidy on paper but meant nothing when measured against the price of blood. Kate's eyes scanned her instruments. Fuel, full. Weapons, green. GAU-8, 1,174 rounds of 30mm high explosive incendiary ammunition. A minute and a half of continuous fire that sounded, from the ground, like God ripping the sky in half another. Transmission from Thorn, this one weaker, the strain undeniable. Havoc 1. We have 2 men down, critical. We are being overrun. If anyone is on this net, anyone, send the storm. Send the storm. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. That was what the grunts called the A-10. Not a tractor, not antiquated. The storm. The thing that came when all hope was lost. She looked at Pops. He met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the same conflict, the same desperate calculus she was running in her own head. To launch without explicit orders was career suicide. She'd be court-martialed, stripped of her wings, her life's dream turned to ash. But to sit here, listening to those men die, that was a different kind of death. A death of the soul. She thought about her oath. It wasn't an oath to a rulebook. It was an oath to support and defend. Right now, the Constitution was being defended by a handful of men bleeding out in a ravine 10 clicks away. This was the quiet moment where legacies were forged or broken. Not in the heat of a dogfight, but in the silence of a cockpit on a hot tarmac, with the ghosts on the radio begging for a miracle. Captain, Pop said softly, his voice barely a whisper. The maintenance logs show you're scheduled for a functional check flight to test the engine performance under load. Just got the paperwork signed off this morning. Kate's mind snapped to attention. It was a lie, a beautiful, glorious, career-ending lie. A functional check flight, or FCF, was a real thing, and it gave a pilot a certain degree of latitude. It wasn't a combat sortie, but it got her in the air. It was a fig leaf, a paper-thin justification that would never hold up in an inquiry. But it was something. It was the only door that wasn't welded shut. The flight plan takes you right over the Korangal Valley, doesn't it? She asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in her hands. A slow smile spread across Pop's face. Amazing coincidence, isn't it? Almost like fate. She took a deep breath, the filtered cockpit air tasting of ozone and finality. She flipped a series of switches. The engines, which had been idling, began to spool up with a rising, hungry whine. The whole airframe vibrated, a caged beast waking from its slumber. Pops, she said, her voice now pure steel. Get clear. He gave a sharp nod, unplugged his cord, and slapped the fuselage twice, a gesture of luck and farewell. He stepped back, standing tall on the tarmac as if he were saluting. Kate keyed her MIC to the tower. Bagram Tower, this is Hog 2-6-1. Requesting taxi to runway for a functional check flight. The tower operator, a young airman who knew nothing of the drama unfolding on the command net, responded with bored professionalism. Hog 2-6-1, you are cleared to taxi. Wind is 270 at 5. Runway 0 to 3. As the Warthog began to roll, lumbering towards the runway like a prehistoric predator, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. No turning back. She was a Valkyrie, and she was going to the battlefield, invited or not. She lined up. On the runway, the long strip of concrete stretching out before her like a path to either damnation or redemption. Pushing the throttles to the firewall, the immense power of the twin engines pressed her back into her seat. The ground fell away. She was airborne. She was climbing through 5,000 feet, banking hard to the east, when a new voice, cold and furious, crackled in her headset. It was Colonel Matthews, the wing commander. Someone had seen her take off. Someone had figured it out. Captain Rostova, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Your FCF was cancelled 30 minutes ago. You are not authorized for this flight. I am ordering you to stand down. Return to base immediately. Acknowledge. The command was direct, unequivocal. There was no room for misinterpretation. Below her, the mountain stretched on, a silent, waiting battlefield. On the radio, there was only the sound of static where the SEAL's cries for help had been. Had she hesitated too long? Was she already too late? The colonel's order hung in the air, a final, uncrossable line. Obey, and her career was saved, but her honor was lost. Disobey, and she was a renegade, a pariah with a target on her back. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. The silence stretched for an eternity. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The colonel's voice was the voice of reason, of order, of a lifetime spent following the rules that kept the intricate machinery of the military from flying apart. It was the voice of her father, a decorated officer himself, who had taught her that integrity and discipline were two sides of the same coin. To disobey a direct order from her wing commander, in the air, was the single greatest sin a pilot could commit. Her career, her wings, everything she had fought tooth and nail for, would be incinerated. She could almost feel the phantom weight of the court-martial papers in her hands. But then, another sound filtered through her mind, a ghost on the frequency. Send the storm. It wasn't a command, but a plea. A prayer from the dirt. The rules were written for a world that made sense. The valley below was not that world. Her thumb moved, deliberately, and pressed the transmit button. Sir, she said, her voice a carefully crafted mix of professionalism and feigned confusion. My apologies. I'm having intermittent issues with my comms panel. Picking up a lot of static. Did you say? I was cleared to proceed to the assigned grid for systems check. A stunned silence followed from the other end. She hadn't directly disobeyed. She had created plausible deniability, a tiny crack of doubt. It was a gamble, a high-stakes poker bluff played at 10,000 feet. Before the colonel could recover and issue an order so simple it couldn't possibly be misunderstood, she spoke again, her voice all business. Command, my systems are showing fluctuations consistent with high-altitude atmospheric conditions. Continuing on pre-filed FCF flight path to diagnose. Valkyrie out. She released the button and immediately switched to a secondary tactical frequency, the one used for ground coordination. The silence on that channel was even more terrifying than the shouting had been. It meant they were either saving ammunition, or worse. She pushed the throttles forward, and the Warthog, heavy with fuel and ordnance, clawed for more altitude. She wasn't flying a check flight anymore. She was a lone warrior heading into the dragon's lair. The world below transformed as she flew east. The relative safety of Bagram gave way to a lawless, ancient landscape. The mountains were brutal and unforgiving, sharp peaks and deep ravines carved by time and conflict. They were perfect for ambushes, perfect for hiding the sins of men. From her vantage point, she could see the veins of dried riverbeds snaking through the valleys, the same paths that had been used by warriors for centuries, from Alexander the Great to the Soviet Union. Now, it was a generation's turn to bleed in them. She imagined the SEALs down there. Men at the absolute peak of human conditioning, trained to be ghosts, to be untouchable. Now they were just men, cornered and outnumbered. She pictured their leader, Thorne. His face in the briefing had been unreadable, but she'd seen the subtle tightening around his eyes when Razor had dismissed the A-10. He was a man who understood that plans were just fantasies until the first shot was fired. His plan had disintegrated, and he was now holding his team together with sheer force of will. Did he still believe they could get themselves out? Or was he just trying to buy his men a few more minutes of life? As she neared the coordinates, a new update crackled over the secure data link from Pops, who was monitoring the intelligence feeds back at the base. It was a single, chilling line of text on her multifunction display. Intel update. SIGINT detects chatter about a Sky-Eater. Possible ZU-23-2 emplacement on Western Ridge. A ZU-23-2. A Soviet-made twin-barreled anti-aircraft gun. It was nicknamed the Serpent by Russian pilots for the way its streams of tracer fire snaked into the sky. It was a can opener for aircraft, especially a low, slow-moving one like the A-10. This changed everything. This wasn't just a group of insurgents with rifles anymore. This was a sophisticated, prepared trap. They hadn't just stumbled upon the SEALs, they had lured them in, knowing that air support would eventually follow. Razor's high speed. F-16s might have been too fast and high to be effectively targeted. But her Warthog, she would be flying right into its teeth. The name Skaida suddenly felt terrifyingly personal. She felt a knot of cold fear tighten in her stomach. This was the moment of truth. She could still turn back. She could claim the new intelligence made the risk unacceptable. The colonel would probably even commend her for her prudence, happy to have his rogue pilot back on the leash. No one would ever know she had been just minutes away. No one but her. And she would have to live with the ghosts on the radio for the rest of her life. If you believe in standing your ground, even when you're outgunned, hit that subscribe button. The thought was a flicker, a strange intrusion of an outside world into the sterile focus of the cockpit. It was the kind of thing a YouTuber would say, not a combat pilot. But the sentiment was the same. You either held the line, or you didn't. She held the line. Pops, copy that intel, she transmitted back on the secure channel. Adjusting my ingress. I'll come in from the south, use the sun and the terrain to mask my approach. Godspeed, Valkyrie, was his only reply. She descended, hugging the contours of the earth, a dangerous maneuver that required every ounce of her concentration. The A-10 was remarkably agile for its size, and she danced it through the canyons, the wingtips seeming to skim the rock faces. The sun was at her back, a blinding glare for anyone looking up from the valley floor. It was her only real advantage. Finally, she crested the last ridge. The valley opened up before her, and it was pure chaos. She could see it all with the clarity of a hawk. The SEALs, no more than 6 or 7 of them still moving, were pinned behind a cluster of rocks near the center of the valley floor. Muzzle flashes winked from dozens of positions on the ridges above them, a semicircle of fire that had them completely boxed in. She saw the puffs of dirt as rounds impacted all around their meager cover. They were trapped in a kill zone. She keyed her MIC to the tactical frequency. Trident lead, this is Valkyrie on station. I am overhead. The response was immediate, laced with a mixture of shock and raw desperation. It was Thorn. Valkyrie. Who the hell is Valkyrie? Where did you come from? Less questions, more talking. Trident lead, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. I have eyes on your position. Talk to me. Where do you need it most? There was a pause, a moment of calculation on the ground. Then, there, dug in on the eastern ridge, coordinates, standby. He was a professional. Hope, however slim, had returned, and he was already putting it to use. Negative, I see them, Kate cut in. But I also see something you don't. There's a heavy gun emplacement on the western ridge, hidden in a rockfall. They're holding their fire, waiting for me. They want to draw me in. A curse came over the radio from one of the other SEALs. It's a damn trap. Every party needs a pooper, Kate said calmly, her eyes scanning the western ridge, looking for any sign of the ZU-23-2. Let's start with the immediate threats first. Eastern ridge. I'm coming in hot. Valkyrie, be advised, we have friendlies. We are right in the line of fire. Thorn yelled. The danger of a close air support run was immense. A slight miscalculation, a moment of target fixation, and she could end up killing the very men she was trying to save. Trident lead, she said, her voice dropping, becoming an extension of the machine she was flying. Look up. Put your hand in the air and tell me when my wings are level with your position. It was an old, unorthodox trick for gauging alignment, relying on the pilot's eyes and the soldier's word. It required absolute trust. Down below, a hand went up. Thorn's hand. He was trusting her. She rolled the Warthog onto its side, the ground turning sideways in her view. She was diving, the speed building, the hum of the engines turning into a roar. The world narrowed to the small patch of rock and dust where the enemy was firing from. Her thumb moved from the stick to a small, red button on the throttle. The trigger for the GAU-8 Avenger. Okay, steady, steady. Thorn's voice was a lifeline in her ear. Now, wings level. Her thumb squeezed, but just as the nose of her aircraft aligned with the target, a new light blinked frantically. On her console, a radar lock. Not from the ZU-23-2. This was something else, something faster. Before she could process it, Her threat display lit up with a symbol that made her blood run cold. A-10 A shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missile AT the same instant. A voice screamed over the SEALs channel, "Missile! Missile! They've got a manpads on the East Ridge." They had been waiting for her to commit. The ZU-23-2 on the west was the bait. The real threat, the hidden stinger, was right next to the target she was about to obliterate down below. Thorne saw it too. A plume of smoke streaking upwards from the ridge, a fiery arrow aimed directly at the heart of the slow-moving A-10. His voice, filled with sudden horror, blasted through her headset. "Valkyrie, break off. Break. It's right on you." There was no time to think. There was only instinct, honed by 1,000 hours in the simulator and a primal will to live. Kate didn't break off. Evasion was a luxury she didn't have, not when she was already committed to the dive, her nose pointed at the heart of the enemy. To pull up now would expose the broad, vulnerable belly of her aircraft to the heat-seeking missile. It was a death sentence. Instead, she did the one thing the enemy would never expect. She pushed the nose down even harder, accelerating directly towards the source of the fire. Her left hand slammed a button on the console, sending a cascade of brilliant white flares spewing from the back of the Warthog, a desperate attempt to fool the missile's seek ahead. Her right thumb, which had never left the trigger of the cannon, squeezed down hard. The world erupted in a cataclysm of sound and vibration. The GU-8 Avenger came to life with a noise that wasn't merely heard but felt deep in the bone, a furious, guttural roar that tore the air to shreds. BRT. For 2 solid seconds, the A-10 became a fire-breathing monster, spewing a torrent of 30mm depleted uranium and high-explosive rounds at 65 shells per second. The stream of traces was like a solid laser beam of incandescent rage, striking the eastern ridge with the force of a localized meteor shower. The manpads operator, his eyes wide with the shock of the oncoming storm, never had a chance to see. If his missile hit, he and his position were simply erased from existence, consumed by a daisy chain of explosions that ripped across the ridge, vaporizing rock and flesh with equal prejudice. Inside the cockpit, Kate pulled back hard on the stick, the G-forces crushing her into her seat. The A-10, its cannons suddenly silent, responded with a grunt of protest. The incoming missile, its original target now gone and confused by the cloud of flares, shrieked past her canopy, close enough for her to see the glint of metal. It exploded harmlessly against the mountainside behind her, a final, impotent firework silence. Then, a single, stunned voice over the radio from the ground. It was one of the younger SEALs. Jesus Christ, Kate's breathing was ragged, her body humming with adrenaline. "Trident lead," she said, her voice impossibly calm as she leveled her wings, the A-10 climbing away. "Eastern Ridge. Should be quieter now. How copy?" There was a pause, and then Thorne's voice came back, devoid of the earlier desperation. It was replaced by something else. Valkyrie, we copy. Solid hit. That was solid hit. Hostile fire from the east has ceased. He sounded like a man who had just seen a ghost, and the ghost was on his side. The dynamic had shifted. The SEALs on the ground weren't just victims anymore. They were the anvil. And Kate was the hammer. For the next 10 minutes, she became the storm the grunts had named her plane for. The A-10, so often derided as slow and ugly, became a terrifyingly graceful instrument of war in her hands. She wasn't a fighter pilot, jousting in the empty sky. She was a warrior of the earth, a guardian who had come down from the heavens to fight in the mud. "All right, Valkyrie." Thorne's voice was now a conductor's baton, directing her fury. "They're trying to regroup. See the cluster of rocks at 10 o'clock from my position? It's a machine gun nest." "Tally," Kate replied, already rolling into a steep bank. "On it." This time, she used rockets, unleashing a salvo of Hydra 70s that turned the rock formation into a smoking crater. The shockwave rolled across the valley floor on the ground. The SEALs, emboldened by the turning tide, began to move. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. They leapfrogged from cover to cover, their own gunfire now precise and deadly, picking off the disoriented enemy fighters who were more focused on the metal demon in the sky than the commandos. Advancing on the ground. The balance of fear had been completely upended, but Kate hadn't forgotten the primary threat, the Sky Eater. The ZU-23-2 on the western ridge had remained silent, a patient predator. The commander on that gun was smart. He knew he'd only get one good shot, and he was waiting for her to make a mistake, to get predictable, to fly. Low and slow enough for him to finally strike. It was a deadly chess match, and every move she made brought her closer to his kill box. "Pops, are you still with me?" She transmitted on the secure channel, her voice a low murmur between attack runs. "Right here, kid." His voice was a steady anchor. "You're doing good. Real good. But your fuel state is getting low. You've got about 15 more minutes of playtime before you're running on fumes." 15 minutes. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. It was enough time to finish the job, but it was also enough time for one thing to go wrong. A new call came from Thorn. "Valkyrie, the main enemy force is breaking. They're retreating up the northern pass. Looks like a full-blown rout." Relief washed over Kate, cool and sweet. They had done it. They had turned a massacre into a victory. Solid copy. Trident lead. Good work down there. I'll keep an eye on them. Make sure they don't get any second ideas. "Just watch yourself with that AA gun," Thorn cautioned. "It's still out there." "Don't worry," Kate said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "I haven't forgotten about him." This was her moment to deal with the Sky-Eater. With the primary threat to the SEALs neutralized, she could focus all her attention on the anti-aircraft gun. She climbed, putting distance between her and the ground, circling wide to the west to get a new angle on the position Pops had flagged. Her targeting pod, a sophisticated camera mounted under the fuselage, swiveled to life, scanning the ridge. The high-definition thermal imaging cut through the shadows and the camouflage, and then she saw it wasn't a ZU-23-2. The intel had been wrong again. It was worse. What she saw tucked into a cave mouth on the western ridge was the boxy, unmistakable shape of a 9K-33 OSA, known to NATO as the SA-8 Gecko. It was a mobile, radar-guided surface-to-air missile system. A ZU-23-2 was dangerous. An SA-8 was a death sentence for an A-10. It was a dedicated air defense system, capable of hitting targets much higher and faster than her. The ZU-23 was a rifle. This was a guided sniper round. The entire ambush had been a sophisticated trap, on a level she couldn't have imagined. They hadn't been trying to shoot her down with a clunky cannon. They had been trying to force her into a predictable flight pattern so their real weapon, the SA-8, could acquire a clean radar lock and take her out of the sky. Her dance of destruction over the valley had been exactly what they wanted. She had been so focused on saving the SEALs that she had walked right into the real kill zone as if on cue. Her threat receiver screamed to life again. But this wasn't the simple tone of a heat seeker. This was the steady, terrifying growl of a full radar lock. The SA-8 was active. "It saw her Trident lead," she said, her voice dropping all pretense of calm. It was now sharp, urgent. "I need you to confirm. Are all your men accounted for? Are you in the clear?" "We are moving to the exfil point now," Thorn replied, sensing the change in her tone. "Why? What is it?" "The Sky-Eater. It's not what we thought. It's a radar-guided SAM. And it's got me painted." A stream of Russian curses from Pops came over the secure channel. "Valkyrie, get out of there. You can't beat that thing. Go defensive, hit the deck and run." But it was too late. A new light flashed on her console, the one she prayed she would never see. Missile launch dot on her screen. She could see it, a white-hot dot detaching from the western ridge, climbing at astonishing speed. It wasn't a dumbfire rocket. It was a guided missile, and its electronic brain was locked onto the metal signature of her aircraft. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The missile was faster than she was, smarter than her flares. It was the perfect weapon, designed specifically to kill her. Her mind raced, cycling through a dozen different desperate, last-ditch defensive maneuvers. None of them were likely to work. She was too low, too slow. The missile would be on her in seconds. From the ground, the SEALs watched in horror as the thin white line of the missile smoke trail drew a perfect, deadly vector towards the A-10 that had just saved their lives. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an elastic, syrupy crawl. In the space of a single heartbeat, Kate's mind became a supercomputer, processing the grim physics of her situation. Running was impossible. Outmaneuvering the missile was a fool's hope. The SA-8 was a sophisticated killer. Its proximity. Fuse designed to detonate near the target, showering it with shrapnel even if it didn't score a direct hit. There was only one option left. It wasn't in any manual. It was a desperate, suicidal move that relied on the unique, unyielding toughness of the machine she was flying. Instead of turning away, she rolled the A-10 and pointed its nose directly at the incoming missile. "Pops, tell my father I was a good pilot," she said into the secure channel, her voice a strange, calm whisper. "Kid, don't you dare." Pop screamed back, his voice cracking with anguish. She ignored him. Her eyes were locked on the approaching point of light. The Warthog was famous for the titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, a shell of armor capable of withstanding direct hits from cannon fire. It was designed to protect the pilot. She was about to test that design to its absolute limit. Her plan was insane. She would fly through the missile's blast radius, hoping the armor would shield her from the worst of the fragmentation. It was like trying to outrun an explosion by flying into IT.AT the last possible second. Just as the missile seeker was about to register a perfect hit, she fired the GAU-8. Not at the missile, but at the air in front of it. BRRT. A 1-second burst. A wall of 30mm shells. It wasn't meant to destroy the missile, but to trigger its proximity fuse prematurely. The sky in front of her detonated in a blinding flash of white and orange. The Warthog plunged directly through the fireball and the expanding cloud of razor-sharp shrapnel. The sound was indescribable, a deafening shriek of protesting metal as hundreds of fragments hammered against the airframe. Her entire world became a violent, shuddering chaos. Alarm screamed, the cockpit lights flickered and died, then came back on. The right engine sputtered, coughed black smoke, and went silent. The plane yawed violently to the right, trying to flip over on its back. She was flying a broken machine, fighting with every muscle in her body to keep it level. A huge, jagged hole had been torn in her right wing, and the engine on that side was a mangled wreck, trailing a thick plume of fire and smoke. But the cockpit was intact. The titanium tub had held. She was alive. "Valkyrie. Report. Kate, talk. To me." Pop's voice was frantic. "I'm here," she coughed, the smell of smoke filling the cockpit. "Right engine is out. Major damage to the wing and hydraulics. But I'm still flying." She had survived. She had done the impossible. But her aircraft was mortally wounded. Standard operating procedure was crystal clear. Get the hell out. Point the nose towards base and pray you make it. If not, eject. "I'm turning for home. Trident lead," she transmitted on the tactical frequency, her voice strained. "Looks like my day is done." "Roger that, Valkyrie." Thorne's voice came back, thick with relief. "You did more than enough. Godspeed. We'll buy you a steak the size of this whole damn valley." The SEALs were moving towards their extraction point, a small, flat area at the northern end of the valley where a helicopter could land. The enemy was in full retreat. The battle was won. All she had to do was go home. She wrestled the crippled A-10 into a slow, wide turn, pointing its nose towards the distant promise of Bagram. The plane flew like a wounded duck, every gust of wind threatening to send it into an unrecoverable spin. Her arms ached from the constant pressure she had to apply to the controls to keep it stable. But as she steadied her course, her eyes were drawn back to the valley floor. Her targeting pod, miraculously still functional, was still focused on the area. She saw the SEALs, moving with purpose. But she also saw something else. One of them wasn't moving. A lone figure was lying near a wrecked enemy vehicle, about 200 yards behind the main group. Two other SEALs were breaking away from the team, running back for him under the cover of the rocks. They had a man down, and they weren't leaving him behind. At the same time, her display lit up with a new threat. A small group of enemy fighters, the ones who had been rooting, had seen it too. They had stopped their retreat. They saw a chance to claim one final prize, to salvage some victory from the humiliating defeat. They were flanking around, using a dry riverbed as cover, closing in on the two SEALs and their wounded brother. Kate's blood ran cold. The main SEAL team was too far away to provide effective covering fire. The two rescuers were about to walk into another ambush. They were going to die trying to save their friend. And she was the only one who could see it. The only one who could stop it. Her hand hesitated on the throttle. Home was that way. Safety. A hot meal and a soft bed. A court-martial, maybe, but she would be alive. Back there, in the valley, was certain danger. Her plane was a wreck. It could fall out of the sky at any moment. To turn back now, to re-engage, was not just against the rules, it was suicide. This was the moment her journey had been leading to. It wasn't about proving Razor wrong anymore. It wasn't about her skills or her pride. It was about the man on the ground. It was about the oath she took. It was a choice between her life and theirs. She made her choice. Trident lead, this is. Valkyrie, she said, her voice now devoid of any strain, replaced by an eerie, resonant calm. I'm coming back around. Negative, Valkyrie, you are too damaged. Thorne's voice was a sharp command. Get out of here. That's an order. Can't do that, Chief, she replied softly. You've got wolves closing in on. You're sheep. I'm not leaving one behind. She banked the crippled A-10, the airframe groaning in protest. On the secure channel, her colonel was probably screaming himself hoarse, but she had tuned him out. There was only the mission now. As she came around, the tactical situation became terrifyingly clear. The enemy fighters were setting up behind. An old, abandoned fuel tanker truck, not 50 yards from the wounded SEAL. It gave them perfect cover. It was also a massive bomb waiting to go off. She couldn't use her cannon. The spray of explosive shells would inevitably hit the truck, engulfing the wounded SEAL and his rescuers in a massive fireball. She checked her weapon stores. She had used most of her rockets. All she had left that offered any precision was a single AGM-65 Maverick missile. A fire and forget, TV-guided missile. A tank killer. It was perfect, except for one small detail. The shrapnel from the SAM explosion had damaged the connection to its guidance system. Her targeting pod could see the enemy, but it couldn't talk to the missile. She couldn't lock on. Pop's voice came over the radio, tense and frantic. Kid, your Maverick guidance is offline. You can't get a lock. It's a dud. It's not a dud, Pops, she replied, her mind racing. The rocket motor is fine. The warhead is fine. It just can't see the target. There was an old, almost forgotten backup procedure. A manual, boresight launch. It meant turning the entire aircraft into the guidance system. She would have to point the nose of the plane exactly where she wanted the missile to go, launch it, and pray. It flew straight. It was like trying to throw a dart in a hurricane, from a mile away. The margin for error was non-existent. A few feet to the left, and she'd miss. A few feet to the right, and she'd hit the fuel truck. It's one thing to be brave. It's another to choose sacrifice, she thought, the strange, intrusive voice of narration returning. If you believe some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost, subscribe to this channel. She took a deep breath. Trident lead. Tell your men to get their heads down. This is going to be close. She began her final attack run. The plane felt like it was trying to tear itself apart. The single engine screamed, pushing the broken airframe through the sky. She ignored the cacophony of warning alarms. Her world narrowed to her heads-up display and the view through the canopy. There was the fuel truck. There were the enemy fighters. There was the wounded SEAL. She lined up the shot, her heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She was flying on skill, instinct, and pure faith. The crosshairs on her HUD settled on the enemy position. Steady, steady. Her thumb moved to the weapon release button. She pressed it. A loud clunk echoed as the Maverick missile detached from its pylon under her good wing. It should have ignited instantly, a plume of fire and smoke propelling it towards its target, but nothing happened. For a terrifying second, the missile simply fell, tumbling end over end beneath her aircraft. The rocket motor had failed to ignite. It was a dud, and in that same second, her entire electronics panel, which had been flickering erratically, chose that moment to finally die. The HUD vanished. The screens went black. Every light went out. The cockpit was plunged into a sudden, terrifying darkness, the only light coming from the hostile sun outside. She was flying blind, 1,000 feet above the valley floor, in a plane that was actively trying to kill her, having just dropped a useless bomb that had failed to save the men she had sacrificed everything for. On the ground, time stood still. The two SEALs who had gone back for their brother froze, watching the Maverick missile tumble from the wing of the crippled A-10. It fell for what felt like an eternity, a useless piece of metal dropping from the sky. The enemy fighters, who had ducked when they saw the plane dive, now looked up, their faces breaking into triumphant, jeering grins. They saw the missile fail. They saw the A-10, trailing smoke and flame, struggling to stay in the sky. There. God in the machine was broken. They raised their rifles to finish the job, to execute the 3 helpless SEALs, and then it happened. After falling for 100 feet, the Maverick's rocket motor, delayed but not dead, ignited with a furious roar. The missile, now pointing almost straight down, suddenly corrected itself. Its simple guidance system, designed only to fly straight, did just that. It streaked not towards the enemy fighters, but towards the ground directly in front of them. It slammed into the earth 10 feet in front of the fuel truck. The explosion was immense. Not from the missile's warhead itself, but from the sheer kinetic force and the concussive blast in the enclosed space of the riverbed. It didn't rupture the tanker, but it kicked up a monstrous wave of rock, dirt, and air. The blast wave hit the enemy fighters like a physical fist, throwing them back, shattering their cover, and stunning them into oblivion. The fuel truck rocked violently but remained intact. It was a perfect, impossible shot. A miracle born of failure. The 2 SEALs stared, stunned, for a second before a voice, Thorne's voice, roared in their headsets. "Get him! Go! Go now!" They snapped back to life, scooped up their wounded teammate, and scrambled back towards the main team as the surviving enemy, confused and terrified, fled for their lives. The valley fell silent, the only sound the distant, struggling whine of Kate's single engine. In the cockpit, Kate knew none of this. She was fighting a purely physical battle, her arms burning, her legs locked on the rudder pedals, trying to coax the dead-stick Warthog to stay level. She assumed the missile had failed, that the men were dead, that her sacrifice had been for nothing. The darkness of the cockpit was mirrored by the darkness in her soul. Then, a voice crackled in her ear. It was on the emergency guard frequency, a channel monitored by all aircraft. It was Thorne, "Valkyrie, if you can hear me, listen. The shot was good. I say again, the shot was perfect. All our people are safe. All of them. You did it, Captain. You got them all. Now get yours home. That's an order from the ground." A single tear cut a clean path through the grime and sweat on Kate's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, bone-deep relief. It hadn't been for nothing. "Roger that, Trident lead," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "On my way." The flight back to Bagram was the longest 40 minutes of her life. With no electronics, she had no navigation, no fuel gauge, no instruments. She flew by sight alone, following a road she had memorized from maps, nursing the sputtering engine, praying the damaged wing would hold. Pop stayed on the emergency frequency, his voice a constant, calming presence. He talked her through it, not with technical jargon, but with stories, about his first car, about his daughter's graduation, about the time he saw an A-10 land with half a wing missing. He was giving her strength, reminding her that the machine was tough, and so was the pilot flying it. As she neared Bagram, she could finally raise the tower. "Bagram Tower, this is Hog 2-6-1. I am 7 miles out, declaring an emergency. I have 1 engine out, massive airframe damage, and no electronics. My landing gear indicator is dead. I have to assume the gear will not deploy. I will be attempting a belly landing." The response was immediate. "Roger, Valkyrie. We see you. Emergency services are standing by. The field is yours. You are cleared to land on any runway." The entire base seemed to hold its breath. As she lined up for her final approach, she could see them, the red and white fire trucks and ambulances, lining the runway like an honor guard. The air was still. She bled off speed, getting as low and slow as she dared. The moment the plane's belly touched the concrete, the world became a symphony of destruction. A scream of tortured metal echoed across the airfield as the A-10 slid down the runway in a shower of sparks, a controlled, terrifying grind. She held the stick back, keeping the nose up as long as she could, fighting to keep the broken machine straight. Finally, after skidding for what felt like a mile, the Warthog slewed to the side and came to a shuddering, final stop silence. Then, the sound of approaching sirens. The canopy was popped open by the emergency crew, and hands reached in to help her. She unstrapped herself, her body screaming in protest, and climbed out onto the wing. She was exhausted, covered in sweat and grime, but she was alive. As she stood on the tarmac, leaning against the scarred and broken fuselage of her savior, a strange thing happened. The base, which was always a hive of activity, went quiet. Mechanics stopped turning wrenches. Airmen stopped loading cargo. pilots climbing into their own jets paused. Everyone just stood and stared. They stared at the pilot who had flown A. Ghost back from the dead across the tarmac, near the operations building, she saw a small group of pilots. In the center was Major Dan Razor Kellen. He had heard everything on the command net. He had heard the frantic calls, her defiance, her calm in the storm, and the final, unbelievable reports from the SEALs. He watched her, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and gave her a slow, sharp salute. It wasn't the mockery of the briefing room. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect. The other pilots followed suit. It was her first taste of justice, silent and profound. Days later, the official inquiry was a whirlwind. The colonel, caught between fury at her insubordination and awe at her results, was at a loss. But the report from Chief Petty Officer Thorne had sealed it. It was concise, brutal, and unwavering in its praise. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that Captain Kate Rostova had single-handedly saved the lives of his entire team, engaging a superior enemy force after command and control assets had abandoned the field. It was a work of art, a bureaucratic shield that made a court-martial politically impossible. She received a reprimand for her record and a medal for her file. The final, true payoff came a week later. Kate was in the hangar, standing with Pops, looking at the mangled remains of tail number 261. It would never fly again. It had given its life to save hers. She heard footsteps and turned. It was Thorne, his face as hard as ever, but his eyes were different. He wasn't alone. His entire SEAL team was with him, standing in a silent, formidable line. Thorne walked right up to her, stopping a foot away. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He simply looked her in the eye, then reached up to his own uniform. He pulled the golden trident insignia from the Velcro on his chest, the sacred symbol of the Navy SEALs. He held it out to her in the palm of his hand. "We have a saying," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. "The only easy day was yesterday. You went through hell for us. You flew into the storm when everyone else ran away." He pressed the patch into her hand. "We don't give these to outsiders. But you're not an outsider. When you were up there, and we were down there, we were one team. One fight." He paused, and for the first time, she heard him use her call sign without a trace of doubt or surprise. He said it like it was her real name, a title she had earned in blood and fire. "Welcome to the Brotherhood, Valkyrie." Kate looked down. At the golden trident in her palm, its sharp points pressing into her skin. Then she looked up at Thorne, at the faces of the men she had saved, men who were now her brothers. A single tear, the same one from the cockpit, welled in her eye and fell, a silent, final drop of relief and redemption. The call sign wasn't a name on a helmet anymore. It was who she was. She was the chooser of the slain, the rider of the storm, the pilot who flew a broken chariot home from the gates of Valhalla.